Okay, good morning, good week to everybody. I hope you're doing well so far today. It's great to see all of you and start another week together. We're going to do a Rashi today from the second Aliyah since it is Monday, and I will share my screen with you. In Parshas Terumah, we learn all about the construction of the Mishkan and various vessels, and the Torah opens up kind of with a bang with the exciting descriptions of all the materials used in the Mishkan and various kalim, various vessels that are being constructed. And at the end of the first Aliyah, it talks about the construction of the Aron. And thank you, Debbie, for not doing Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it would have been a good tie-in specifically for this day in this Aliyah. And the first Aliyah, it starts to talk about the Aron, its various facets, the different boxes that it's made of, the rings that are on the sides, the badim, the staves that have to go in the side to be able to carry it. And then in our Aliyah, it transitions to a very specific portion of the Aron, which is the covering of the Aron, the kaporet. So the pasuk begins, "V'asisa kaporet zahav tahor." You're supposed to make a covering of pure gold, and the covering is supposed to have these two kruvim, and they are supposed to be porsei knafayim, these two angelic figures, which are supposed to have their wings hovering over it, etc., etc. When sata esa kaporet al ha'aron, and this covering is supposed to go on the aron. By the way, before we get to our actual Rashi today, I just wanted to point out this is one of the psukim that helps us to understand a different conjugation of the shoresh of the root chaf pe resh, kaper, which is kapara. In the topic of tshuva and atonement, we talk about kapara, atonement. There's korbanos that come for kapara. There's Yom HaKippurim, which comes for kapara. And many try to figure out what the difference is between slicha and kapara, between atonement and forgiveness, or mechila. There are three terms that are kind of associated with the whole idea of being forgiven, but they're slightly different. It's a whole study in and of itself, what those different terms mean. But one of the things that kapara means is that the sin is covered over. It's as if it's not seen anymore. That's what atonement means. Mechila might mean that it's erased. Slicha might mean that the feelings are forgiven. But in terms of the deed itself, kapara doesn't necessarily mean it's erased. It's just covered from the eye. It's covered over. It's hidden. And that's why we have the word kaporet here. Translated differently here, it's the cover. Kisui al ha'aron. So from here, we realize that the word kapara has to do with something with covering over. That's just an interesting tie-in between the word kapores and the word kapara. But now, getting to our pasuk, the punchline of the whole description of the kapores, of this cover with the kruvim on it, is v'no'adati l'chasham v'dibarti itcha me'al ha'kapores mibein shnei ha'kruvim. Hashem says to Moshe, when I speak to you, I'm going to speak to you from above this kapores, from in between the wings of the kruvim, asher al haron ha'edus, that's covering over the aron, asher es kol asher atzaveh oschaz b'nei Yisrael. Everything I tell you that I'm commanding b'nei Yisrael through you, all of that is going to be conveyed from this spot. That's where I'm going to speak to you. Now, it's hard to understand. What does it mean God is speaking to him? What does it mean God is speaking to him from that spot? Did that mean just Moshe heard the voice emanate from there? Did Moshe see something there? What was the experience like? We don't know. And of course, it's hard for us to even use those words, hearing God's voice. What exactly does that mean? How do we anthropomorphize God in that way? But that's a longer discussion. But Rashi notices just a very technical oddity about this pasuk, or discrepancy between this pasuk and other pasukim we know. So here it says, Dibarti ischam itcha me'al ha'kapores. Here God is speaking to him from above the aron, from this kapores, from above the covering of the aron. But he says, Ubemakom acher hu omer vayedeber Hashem elav me'ohel moed. If you look in the first pasuk of Vayikra, it says, Vayikra el Moshe, Hashem called to him, Vayedeber Hashem elav, God speaks to him, me'ohel moed lemor. We learn that the speaking to Moshe happens not above the kapores, not above the covering of the aron, but from ohel moed. And as Rashi says, Zeha mishkan michutz la paroches. This is in the Mishkan area outside the paroches, outside the curtain that separates between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodashim, not the Kapores, which is above the Aron, which is inside the Kodesh HaKodashim. So which one is it? Is God speaking to him from inside the Kodesh HaKodashim, above the Kapores, above the covering of the Aron, like our psukim state? Or is he speaking to him from outside, from outside the parochas, from the Ohel Moed, the general area of the Mishkan, outside of the Kodesh Kodeshim. So there seems to be a discrepancy between them. Nimtu shnei ksuvim machishim ze et ze. The pasuk here in Terumah and the pasuk in Vayikra seem to be contradicting one another. So what do? What we do is we have, thankfully, a third pasuk that comes to explain it all. And that is right over here, Rashi in Bamidbar Perek Zayin. Sorry, not Rashi, the pasuk in Bamidbar Perek Zayin, right over here, which Rashi quotes here in our Rashi. Ba Hashlishi v'yichriya. The third pasuk comes and decides between the two that contradict each other. The pasuk says, "Uvevo Moshe el Ohel Moed, vayishma es hakol midaber elav me'al hakapores." The pasuk here specifically says, "B'midbar Perek Zayin, Ubebo Moshe el Ohel Moed, when Moshe came to the Ohel Moed, ledaber ito, vayishma es hakol midaber elav me'al hakapores." Then he heard the voice of God coming from al hakapores, from above the covering, asher al aron he'edus mibein shnei kruvim, from above the area of the kapores in between these shnei kruvim. So how does Rashi use that third pasuk to explain the discrepancy between the other two? He says, Moshe haya nichnas lamishkan, v'kevan sheba betoch hapesach ko yored min hashamayim lebein hakruvim, umisham yotze v'nishma lemoshe ba'oel moed. What we learn here from this pasuk, which says, as soon as Moshe entered the Ohel Moed to speak to God, he heard the voice of God speaking to him from above the kapores. What we learn from that pasuk is that, yes, the voice did emanate from above the kapores, from above the covering of the Aron, like our psukim in Terumah tell us. And yet, the pasuk in Vayikra is also true that God spoke to him from the Ohel Moed. Why? Because the pasuk in Bamidbar tells us that Moshe was stationed in the Ohel Moed. Moshe entered the precincts of the Mishkan in general. As soon as he entered the doorway, he started to hear communication from God. But where did he hear it emanating from? Where did he hear it coming from? From above the kapores, from above the Aron, which was way over there inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So both are true. That is where he speaks to God, in the Ohel Moed, in the general precincts of the Mishkan. But where the voice emanates from is specifically over the kapores. That's how Rashi explains away the discrepancy between these two psukim, and explains a little bit more about the process of the way Hashem communicated to Moshe in the Aron. Again, very hard to understand what exactly that means. Why is God's voice here and not there? And it's hard to understand exactly what that looked like and what that sounded like for Moshe Rabbeinu, but interesting nonetheless for us to at least understand what it was all about. And I think one of the things that it conveys to us is that even Moshe Rabbeinu was not able to enter the Kodesh HaKodeshim to hear God's voice directly from that space. So even though Moshe saw Hashem with a greater clarity than any prophet in history, certainly greater than us, even Moshe had a barrier to Hashem. Even Moshe had to have a certain level of distance from the place, whatever that means, where God's voice emanated from. Moshe himself had to be restricted and restrained in order to have the proper level of yira, the proper level of awe for his interactions with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So those should never have become too familiar, even to a character and a leader like Moshe Rabbeinu. Have a great day, everybody. Be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Good one.
Thank you,
Bye.
Rabbi.
Thank you.